The wind was sharp that night, cutting through the open plains like a knife. The sky was heavy with clouds and snow fell without stopping. Jacob Turner lived alone in a small wooden cabin at the far edge of the valley. He had built it himself years ago, back when he still believed life could be peaceful. But peace had been a hard thing to keep after he lost his wife. Since then, he had kept mostly to himself. His only company was the soft sound of the fire in his stove and the creak of the old rocking chair beside it. That evening had been like many others. He had finished his supper of beans and bread, checked the barn to make sure his horse was safe from the cold, and then returned inside to warm his hands. The fire was burning low and he was about to add another log when he heard it, a faint sound outside. It wasn't the wind this time. It was softer, like a knock. He froze. No one came this far out into the valley in the middle of a snowstorm. His nearest neighbor was miles away. He waited, thinking he might have imagined it, but then it came again, a quiet, uncertain tapping at the door. Jacob rose from his chair and pulled his coat around his shoulders. He walked slowly to the door, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. When he opened it, the cold air rushed in, and with it came the sight of someone standing there, small, shaking, and wrapped in a thin piece of cloth that barely counted as a blanket. It was a girl. Her hair was dark and long, tangled with snowflakes. Her skin was pale from the cold, and her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Please," she whispered in a broken voice, "please let me stay with you tonight. I'll help you put the log in the stove." Jacob just stared for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. The words were soft, almost lost in the wind, but he heard the desperation in them. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe younger. The way she held herself, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, told him she'd been out in the cold far too long. He looked past her, at the white world outside. The snow was deep now and the night would only get colder. If he turned her away, she wouldn't survive till morning. Still, he hesitated. The girl was Apache. Her people lived farther south near the canyons, and lately there had been trouble between settlers and the tribes. Soldiers patrolled the nearby towns, and anyone found helping a native could be questioned, even punished. But looking into her frightened eyes, Jacob couldn't think about any of that. All he saw was a child in danger. "Come in," he said quietly. She stepped forward, moving as if her legs barely obeyed her. The warmth of the cabin hit her face and she stopped near the fire, staring at it as if she'd never seen anything more beautiful. Jacob shut the door behind her and dropped the bar into place. The storm howled against the wood, but inside the crackle of fire softened the sound. He took an extra blanket from his bed and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Sit close to the stove," he said. "Warm your hands." She knelt beside the fire, her small fingers stretching toward the flames. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the steady burning of wood and the storm outside. After a few minutes, her shivering slowed. He poured her a cup of warm water from the kettle and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, lifting it carefully to her lips. Her fingers were red from the cold and her nails were chipped. When she looked up at him, there was a faint light in her eyes, the kind that comes when fear begins to fade. "My name's Jacob Turner," he said after a moment. "You got a name?" The girl hesitated, as if afraid to answer. Then in a quiet voice she said, "Nita." He nodded. "That's a good name. You from a camp nearby?" She looked down, her lips pressing together. It took her a long time to reply. "My village. Gone," she said finally. "Soldiers came, many run. I run." Jacob felt a heavy ache in his chest. He had heard stories, villages burned, families scattered. He knew that some of those stories were true, but hearing it from a voice that's soft and broken made it real in a way that news never could. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "The storm will pass by morning. You can rest." Nita looked around the cabin again. It was small but warm. There was only one bed, a table, and a few shelves with tools and jars of dried food. It was clear that Jacob didn't have much, but she could see that he had kept it clean, like someone who still cared about the world even when it gave him little reason to. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice trembled again, but this time not from the cold. Jacob nodded once and turned back to the stove. He lifted another log and placed it carefully inside, watching the flames rise higher. Nita watched him too, her eyes following every movement. "You said you'd help with the logs," he said, giving her a faint smile. She smiled back, the first small sign of life he had seen in her face. "I can," she said, and reached for one of the smaller pieces of wood near the pile. Her hands were still shaky, but she managed to set it into the stove with care. Jacob nodded. "Good. That's enough for now." They sat there together, side by side, watching the fire dance. Outside, the wind grew louder, but inside the warmth filled the air. For a long time, neither of them spoke. As the night deepened, Nita began to fight sleep. Her eyes closed for a moment, then opened again. Jacob noticed and said gently, "You can sleep there by the fire." "It's warm enough," she hesitated. You not afraid?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Not of you." Her eyes softened and she lay down slowly on the rug near the stove. The blanket slipped around her shoulders and she curled up beside the warmth. The firelight played over her face, tired, worn, but peaceful for the first time. Jacob sat back in his chair and watched her. He thought of his wife, of the nights they had spent here long ago when laughter still filled the small space. Those days were gone, but somehow seeing this girl asleep by the fire made him feel something again, something like purpose. He stayed awake long after she had drifted into sleep. Every so often he added another log to the stove, keeping the fire alive. The storm beat against the cabin, but the walls held. Near midnight, Nita stirred and whispered something in her sleep, a word he couldn't understand. Her voice was small, full of sadness. Jacob leaned forward but didn't wake her. He knew what fear could do to a person. It wasn't just the cold that hurt. It was losing everything and still trying to hold on. When dawn began to touch the horizon, the snow finally stopped. The fire had burned low, and Jacob stood to check it. Nita was still sleeping, her face turned toward the warmth. For the first time in a long while, Jacob didn't feel the weight of silence pressing on him. He looked at the girl and thought about what to do next. He couldn't send her back out into the world, not like this. Maybe she could stay until she was strong enough to decide her path. Maybe longer. As he watched the pale morning light filter through the cracks in the window, Jacob realized that the cold had brought him something unexpected, a reason to care again. And though the storm outside had passed, he knew the real storm was only beginning. The next morning came slow and quiet. The snow had stopped falling and the valley looked white and still. The cold light of dawn slipped through the window, touching the wooden floor and the edge of the old stove. Jacob Turner woke first, his joints stiff from sitting in the chair all night. The fire had burned down to soft red coals. He stretched, rubbed his hands, and looked toward the rug where Nita lay. She was still asleep, her face half hidden under the blanket. For a moment, she didn't look like a lost wanderer or a girl who had escaped soldiers. She looked like any tired child, safe and resting. Jacob felt a quiet warmth in his chest. He hadn't seen anyone sleeping peacefully in this cabin for years. He added 2 small logs to the stove, careful not to make noise. When the fire caught, it filled the room with a soft orange glow. The smell of wood smoke mixed with the faint scent of snow through the cracks in the window. Jacob poured some water into a pot and set it on the stove. He had just begun slicing bread when he heard her stir. Nita blinked awake, her eyes moving from the fire to him. For a second, she seemed unsure of where she was. Then she remembered and sat up quickly, clutching the blanket. "Morning," Jacob said with a faint smile. She nodded. "Morning." Her voice was quiet, almost shy. "I made a bit of breakfast," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm." She hesitated before crawling closer to the stove. The smell of food made her stomach growl, and Jacob noticed. He handed her a piece of bread and a small bowl of beans. She took it carefully, her fingers trembling just a little. "You can stay till the storm clears," he said after a while. "But if you've got somewhere you need to go, I'll help you get there." She looked down at the bowl and whispered, "Nowhere to go." Jacob felt that same ache again, the one that had settled in his chest the night before. He thought about what must have happened. Her people scattered, her home burned, and her alone in the snow. No one should have to live through that, especially not someone so young. "Then you can stay here a while," he said finally. "There's work to do, and 2 hands make it easier than 1. Nita raised her head. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can help." "I believe you," Jacob said. After breakfast, he opened the door. The cold air rushed in, sharp but clean. The world outside was covered in deep snow that glittered in the morning sun. The trees bent under its weight, and the creek nearby had frozen solid. He stepped out to fetch more firewood, and to his surprise, Nita followed him. "You don't have to," he said. "It's cold out here." She shook her head. I said I help. Her small figure trudged through the snow beside him. She carried smaller logs while he lifted the heavy ones. Her hands were still raw, but she didn't complain. Every few minutes she'd look up and smile faintly, as if proud to be doing something useful. By midday the sun was bright above the valley. Jacob and Nita had stacked enough wood to last for days. He wiped his brow and said, "You did good." She looked at the pile and smiled wider this time. "You work hard," she said softly. He chuckled. "Been doing it a long time." When they went back inside, Jacob made a pot of hot tea. Nita sat near the fire, her feet tucked under the blanket. Her eyes followed the flames again, calm and thoughtful. After a moment, she asked, "Why you live here alone?" Jacob paused, his hand resting on the pot. He didn't expect her to ask that. "I used to live here with someone," he said slowly. "My wife. She passed a few winters ago." Nita lowered her eyes. "I sorry," she whispered. He nodded. "Thank you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people understand loss without needing many words. Days passed like that. The storm never returned, but the snow stayed deep. Nita helped Jacob with chores, feeding the horse, cleaning the cabin, and bringing in water from the well. She worked hard, never complaining. She smiled more often now, though sometimes Jacob caught her staring out the window with a faraway look, as if she still saw the burning of her village in the snow. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jacob noticed her tracing shapes in the air with her finger, little circles and lines. "What's that?" he asked. She looked shy for a moment. "Song of the wind," she said. "My mother teach. We draw it when we scared. It make us brave." Jacob watched her hand move gracefully, her face soft in the firelight. "You can draw it on the table if you want," he said. She smiled a little. "You not mind?" He shook his head. "Not at all." She took a small piece of charcoal and began drawing gentle patterns on the wooden table. Swirls like wind, shapes like feathers. They looked strange but beautiful. Jacob realized they told a story, one he didn't understand but could feel. When she finished, she said quietly, "Now your home have good spirit." Jacob looked at the drawings and said, "Then I guess I'm lucky." The next morning, they were splitting firewood when they heard something unusual, the sound of horses in the distance. Jacob's face changed. He motioned for Nita to step inside. Two riders appeared on the snowy trail. They wore long coats and carried rifles. Soldiers. Jacob's heart sank. They stopped in front of his cabin. "Morning," one of them said. "You seen any natives come through here? A young girl, maybe?" Jacob kept his voice steady. "No, can't say I have. Storm's been bad. Haven't seen anyone for days." The soldier looked around the cabin, eyes narrow. "You live alone out here?" "Just me and my horse," Jacob said. After a tense pause, the man nodded. "If you see anything, report it in town." "I will," Jacob said. The riders turned and rode off, their horses kicking snow into the air. Jacob watched until they disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did he go back inside. Nita was standing near the stove, her eyes wide with fear. Jacob shut the door behind him and said softly, "They're gone." Her voice trembled. "They look for me." He nodded. "I know." She looked down at her hands. "You tell them. You not see me." "I wasn't about to send you out there," Jacob said. "You're safe here." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, not loud ones, not the kind that break a person apart, but the silent kind that come when someone realizes they've been shown kindness they didn't expect. She stepped forward and whispered, "Thank you." Jacob didn't say anything. He just nodded and went back to the stove. But inside something stirred, something deep and unfamiliar. He had spent years closing his heart to the world, and now, this girl he barely knew had somehow brought warmth back into it. That night, as the fire burned steady and the snow glittered under the moonlight, Nita sat near the window and began humming softly. It wasn't a tune Jacob knew, but it was peaceful. He listened without speaking. The melody seemed to belong to the wind and the stars. When she stopped, she looked over and said, "That song mean hope. When everything gone, you still breathe, still stand." Jacob nodded. "That's a good song." They stayed there quietly until the fire burned low. The cabin felt different now, not just a place for one man to survive, but a place where two souls had found safety from the cold world outside. As Jacob drifted toward sleep, he thought about the way she had said that word, hope. He hadn't thought about it in a long time. Maybe he thought the snow had brought her to his door for a reason. Outside, the valley was silent. The storm had passed, but the bond they formed would stay. A fragile, beautiful reminder that even in the harshest winter, warmth can still be found where kindness lives.